Yeah, my heart is still broken. Wow. I have not been so brokenhearted since the passing of Prince. And with Rob Reiner, it's like it, I never even conceived I would feel this way. I mean, I don't know. It's just a complete mess. So the title of this video is Nick Reiner. The coin has fell completely off his ledge. You know that, you ever seen that game that's full of coins, quarters and stuff? And you gotta drop a quarter in so that the thing would push the coins ahead. And it looked like, there's a couple of quarters that's gonna fall right into the slot, right? But no, it moves like a tenth of a centimeter, you know? Well, then you put more quarters in, and it's like, okay, the next one's definitely gonna throw all these coins down. No, they move a tenth of a centimeter, and they're hanging on that ledge. Well, eventually, if enough people come and drop quarters in it, some of them quarters are going to fall. And no telling how many quarters gotta feed the machine before that ever happens. Well, in my estimation, Nick was born with his quarter close to the ledge, close to the edge. And it took 17 years for his coin to fall completely, to drop completely off that ledge. Took 17 years. I've been immersing myself with watching past videos and interviews and listening to interviews with Nick Reiner as well as his dad. And so many red flags. I wish I knew Mr. Rob Reiner. I have a way of convincing, not necessarily convincing, but getting family members to take a look at themselves and to step back out of themselves and look at their situation in dealing with loved ones with an addiction. And there's a couple of things I heard Rob Reiner say, one of them, which is just mortifying to me, he says, he listened to the therapist and they were like, don't listen to Nick. He's manipulating you. He's lying to you. And Rob was like, nobody knows my son better than me. And to me, I could see that he didn't know Nick. And Nick knew his parents better than they knew him. I listened to an interview with Nick, and it's a audio. There's this guy that has a channel called Dopey, and they're former addicts. And really, if you're a addict in recovery, don't go listen to them because it will do nothing but trigger you. They romanticize drug usage deeply. And I find it to be highly, highly triggering. But Nick was on the show, and Nick was talking about his stints with going into rehab. And like I said in the last video, Nick didn't go to state-funded rehabs. He went to rehabs that cost $50,000, $75,000 a month. And at one point, he ended up in Maine, and he missed home in California. He wanted to go back home. He said it wasn't like he had planned to relapse. That wasn't even a thing. He already knew what he was going to do. It's just that he knew what he had to do to get back home to California to do what he wanted to do. And he said he could do anything. This is what Nick said. I could do anything in California and get away with it. And so he knew, and he wanted to get high, but he abstained and remained sober, because he said if he got high in Maine and they did the drug testing, he would never get back to California. So he was able to stay sober just long enough to fool everybody so that he can get back to California, so that he can get high, which is exactly what he did. That is manipulation. And his parents couldn't see it. And I think Rob Reiner, I know I heard him. I watched so many shows and interviews. I know, in his formative years, I think he might have did LSD, like in the late 60s or something like that. He dabbled in drugs, not to a point of an addiction. But, it's what they did, But let me digress for a moment. When I was dealing with family members and friends who were addicted to crack, I just thought it was the worst. And it was the worst because it's a horrible experience, But today, I'm glad that I went through it. I really am, because it taught me a lot. I wish that his parents had dealt with drug addiction, not that I wish, but you know what I mean. Had they had experience with dealing with a family member who is addicted to drugs, like a brother or even a cousin or somebody, they would have had the experience and they would have dealt with Nick a lot differently. Several times, I think about 3 times, Rob Reiner, the great director that he was, actor and all of that, he has this palatial estate where there's, a guest house or 2. And, Nick lived in the guest house. And several times, Nick trashed the guest house. I'm talking about busted up walls, furniture, television, just destroying the place. And yet, he was still allowed, at once they renovated the guest house, he was still allowed to live there. Now, that's some bullshit. Let one of us have been on drugs, which one of us was, meaning out of my siblings. But let him have trashed my mother's home, or even his room in my mother's home. That would have been it. Because for us, money wasn't easy to come by. Not to be renovating rooms or a house that you trash because you in a drug frenzy. But for the Reiners, you worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He trashed the guest house, and that's the least of our worries. That would have been a major worry in my family. But for the Reiners, And, call Mike's Construction, get them over here and they'll renovate the place. They kept Nick around. And I talked about, that tough love where you have to separate yourself. At some point, you have to let your kid, who is a young adult, go out into the world with their addiction. And if they fly, they fly. And if they don't, they don't. You have to get to that point. And the sooner, the better. I already went into the spiel of, having them compare what life is like being sober and what life is like being addicted. Because as long as you are their financial support system that will continue to feed their habit, which will handicap them from being motivated to getting a job and taking care of themselves and being responsible and being a productive member of society, as long as you handicap them from doing that, they're never going to get better. And so having Nick just live in the guest house, keeping him close so they can keep an eye on him, was such a major mistake. For all that, if I was Nick's parent, Nick's parent with Nick's parents' money, that type of money, no, you cannot live in the guest house. In fact, I shouldn't even do this, but I will. I have bought you a house. What state you want to live in? Pick a state. And it can't be next door to California where we live. Pick a state. Oh, you want to live in Texas? Yeah, okay, Texas is far enough away. I'm going to buy you a house. Matter of fact, house is bought. You go live there. What you have to do is get a job. You don't have to worry about a roof over your head. But get a job and make enough money to feed yourself or whatever. Now, you are a step ahead than most addicts. You have a roof over your head. That's all I'm providing. House is paid for. But Nick would have never lived with me again. Not on my property. I don't care if the guest house is on my property a mile away. On the same property. No, you've got to go. You're a man now. How old are you? 32? Why are you living in my guest house? And as far as Dick was concerned, listening to him in his interviews, it was his guest house. Yeah, like I totally trashed my guest house. And he spoke about it like, it was a badge of honor. I don't get it. But that's what happened. Now, when you see pictures and even watch videos of Nick, the eyes are the windows to the soul. You can see through Nick's eyes that the elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. You can see that the cheese is about to slip off his cracker. You can see that oftentimes nobody's home when you look in his eyes. Now, as a parent, I'm sure they knew something was wrong with Nick, aside from his addiction. And the love that they had for their children, you can't practice tough love with Nick. He already has issues. Gotta keep him close. It's our child. We love him. I understand the complexity of their situation. And ultimately, they chose to continue to love Nick in their loving way, as opposed to loving Nick enough for Nick to learn how to take care of himself. Because all Nick really wanted to do was do drugs, get high, do any kind of drug. He just loved to do drugs. They loved Nick, and Nick loved to do drugs. That's what he wanted to do. When I watched Nick and his father do the interviews promoting the movie that they did together, Nick seemed to be a bit awkward to me. When, I was studying him intently, and I thought, I wonder if he is on the spectrum. At times he seemed to be on the spectrum. Nick, I heard him say, whatever I tell you anything about Nick, I'm telling you what I heard out of his own mouth. Nick never went to high school. Nick never went to college. His younger sister, I think she graduated from college. I know she entered college, according to Nick. And most likely she probably finished. The older brother is doing well for himself. Nick, the middle child, didn't even accomplish graduating high school. And I say didn't. I didn't say couldn't. Because when I listened to him talk among his friends from the Dopey interview, and he was on that show about a good 4 times. I mean, it was like a different person than who I watched in the interviews with his dad. Listening to him on the Dopey show, I mean, very articulate, could formulate thoughts, and he just seemed like a normal speaking individual. He didn't sound awkward or seem awkward, but the things he said, it gave you insight to his privilege and how he knew what to do to get away with what he wanted to get away with, so that he could do whatever it is that he wanted to do, which was nothing but get high. Do drugs and get high. That was his ultimate goal in life. Get high. Do drugs and get high. Well, I shouldn't say there's nothing awkward about it, because he did tell this story about he was in this rehab, I believe in New Jersey, and he ended up in New York, and he met some girl that he knew from the rehab, although in that particular rehab, the males were not allowed to speak to the females and vice versa. But somehow he found her on Facebook, and they met up, and she was doing lines of coke, and this was a totally sober situation that I'm about to explain to you, and I'm just telling you the story as I heard Nick tell it. He was totally sober, and she was doing crazy coke, and he said just the way and the amount of coke she was doing just turned him off. He didn't even want to get high, but they ended up taking a shower together, and he says he starts and I'm cleaning it up, as he, the way he spoke. He said, he started digitally penetrating her in the shower. And he said when he pulled his finger out, he saw some brown stuff on the tip, and he asked about it. Well, he didn't realize that he was penetrating her anus. Now that's kind of awkward. He couldn't tell the difference between an anus and a vagina, you know. And then soon after that situation, the girl ended up deleting herself, you know. But, and that's real awkward. And he had to be like 18, 19 at the time, something like that, you know. But getting back to how he communicated with his friends, he didn't seem so awkward or weird, other than that story I just told you. But he knew how to manipulate his parents. And when I heard Rob Reiner talk about, they say, don't believe him, he's lying, he's manipulating you, and I know my son better. And I don't mind sharing with y'all some real shit concerning my family. Now, my brother, and I'm the youngest, so I'm about 8, 9 years old. My brother's like 16. And this was when he started acting out. And my father worked at night, the post office, driving big postal tractor trailers. And my brother might have done something, like got arrested for robbing people's houses and sitting up in an apartment with all the loot with a buddy of his who they both was robbing people's houses. And he got arrested, whatever. And my father would tell my mother, listen, he's under punishment. He's not to leave this house or whatever. My father would leave like 9 o'clock at night, had to be to work at 10, right? Soon as my father would leave, my brother would come to my mother and say, Mom, can I go across the street to the store? Now, your father said for you, I just want to go across the street to the store to get a soda. I'm coming right back. Just want to go across the street. And she would do this every time, give him permission. He would leave and never come back. Thus would start an argument between she and my father when he got home. And my brother wasn't home because he had left the night before going to the store across the street when he wasn't supposed to leave his house, period. My mother was an enabler. She didn't just do that one time. She did it countless times. She was an enabler. He was doing drugs. Started going in and out of jail. Just being a butthole. And maybe by the third time he was in jail and he called home and, this is in the time before cell phones. You have 2 phones in the house, maybe 3. So he calls, my mother's in her room, picks up the phone. I pick up the phone in the back. And I'm about 10 years old at this time because I think the boy who's about 17 is a fucking asshole at this point. So all 3 of us on the phone and I go, Buster, can I ask you a question? Now think of D from What's Happening. If you want to know what Madam Whip Ass was like, D. We look alike and I was just as sassy as she was. Only thing she was a character, but I was really that. So I said, Buster, can I ask you a question? Yeah, what? When you get out of jail this time, are you going to do the same stupid stuff again and get arrested and go back to jail again? Get off the phone! Get off the phone! He starts yelling at me. My mother, hang up the phone, man, with ass. Hang it up. So I just hang up the phone and go on about my business. Because I couldn't understand it. Now, one thing my mother didn't do, and she always said, you go to jail, don't expect me to come visit you. Don't expect me to send you any money. I ain't showing up to court, nothing. And as many times as he went to jail, she never did. You could call, and don't call collect either. But she never went to court. She never went to visit him, and my mother was cheap anyway. She damn sure wasn't going to send him no money. And she didn't. So I have experience with addicted relatives and enablers. I know what denial looks like. I know all of that. And I wish Rob Reiner and or his wife had the same experience, because they most certainly would have still been alive today. They would have dealt with Nick on a whole nother level. Their experience came as they were going through it and leaning on the professionals who were guiding them in the right direction on how to deal with Nick. But Nick knew how much his parents loved him. Oh, he for sure knew, because he exploited it. He knew that their love for him trumped everything. And he took advantage of that and manipulated it. And perhaps in recent weeks, perhaps they started to think, what have we done? Nick is 32 years old. He hasn't held down a job. He lives in a guest house. We are getting up in age. Of course, he'll be taken care of, or it's there that he can be taken care of for the rest of his life. But is that really a good thing? Is that really a good thing? Is this his life? No job, no ambition to do anything but to do drugs. And we have left this planet. And do we leave him to be a burden on his siblings? And who's going to love Nick the way that we love Nick, to let him get away with all of this? And maybe in the last weeks, they probably rethought everything and said, you know what? It makes sense. We have to exercise tough love. Because we love him so much that we don't want to leave him in this world handicapped. And that's what we've been doing all these years. And calling it love. And maybe they put their foot down and said, you know what? Nick is 32 years old. It's time for him to kick these drugs out of his system, out of his life once and for all, and start making something of himself. We'll still support him, but he still needs to be living responsibly on his own at the age of 32. And maybe it was a moment of reflection and realization that the way they have been loving Nick is just not working. It's dysfunctional. And maybe they need to revert back to implementing tough love. And maybe they really meant it, no matter what. Nick can't live in the guest house anymore. He has to go. And maybe Nick really saw this in his parents, like, you know, this is it. I can't even exploit their love for me anymore. What am I going to do? It's been working for 17 years. For 17 years, I've been exploiting their love for me and doing all the drugs that I wanted to do and living in my guest house. You know, that gets me. My guest house. You ain't bought, paid, worked for shit. My guest house. The fuck out of here. Shit, I grew up in a house and I was always told, you ain't got no house. This ain't your house. Did you buy anything in this house? Did you pay for this house? So how is it yours? But in the Reiner family, it was Nick's guest house. His guest house that he can destroy at any whim, and mommy and daddy will pay to renovate it. And he'll destroy it again, and they'll pay to renovate it. But I think the coin that pushed his coin over the ledge was his realization that after 17 years, his manipulative tricks and behavior wasn't going to fly anymore. And so since he could not have his way to live in his guest house and do all the drugs he wanted to do, then mommy and daddy shouldn't live either. I'll stab them 56 times and I'll slit their throat. So there. That's what happens when you don't let me do what I want to do. When you don't let me do the drugs I want to do, you've got to die and die in the worst way. Mommy and daddy. I'll show you. You should have never stopped loving me the way you've been loving me. Your job was to love me enough to let me do drugs and live in my guest house. See how that works? They were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They could have bought Nick his own house when he was 21 in another state. Said, you live there. Get a job, Nick. Hey, Nick, how you doing? Hey, Nick, how you doing? It's Dad. What you doing, huh? You found a job yet? No, Dad, and I really don't have anything to eat. Well, you better get a job and start feeding yourself. Hey, half the battle is won. You ain't got to worry about rent or a roof over your head. You live in a house with your name on it. It's yours. Well, I was thinking about selling the house. You really going to sell your house, Nick, just so you could do drugs? Well, hey, it's up to you. Sell your house. You ain't going to have a house to live in after that because I'm not buying you another one. Figure it out, Nick. And just know, Mom and I, we love you. Bye. That would have been me with my son Nick and my hundreds of millions of dollars. Because my money is my money. That's what I worked for. You didn't work and generate none of this cash, Nick. You didn't even work at McDonald's and contribute to nothing. None of this is yours, Nick. None of it. And you ought to look around and see how blessed you are that I bought you your own house with your name on it. My name isn't even on it. That's your house. Do what thou wilt with your house. If you think selling it is a good idea, so you can do more drugs, go right ahead. But I won't buy you another one. And I shouldn't be buying you this one. But that's if I had the kind of love for drug addict Nick that his parents did. Because I wouldn't have bought him a house. And that's not to say I didn't have any love. Or I wouldn't have any love. But because they chose to allow him to take care of him living on the guest house, in the guest house on their property, that was a kid that you didn't need to have close by. Thus, go ahead and buy him a house. And it probably would have been a one-bedroom house. And I mean a house, not a condo or an apartment, a house. Because I don't need to have him and his junkie friends coming into a condo with other homeowners living in the building and turning, that apartment into a crack house or whatever, a meth house or whatever. But that's how I would have handled it. He wouldn't have been living with me. Bigger than that, Nick has to be a psychopath. I mean, he could not have any thought process as to, well, if I stab them to death, what is this going to do to my siblings? What if one of my siblings finds them in the manner that I have left them? What is it going to do to them? What is it going to do to my siblings for the rest of their lives knowing that I murdered mom and dad? I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, none of that crossed his mind. And I don't think he has even the gumption to even think, as I speak, how this has affected his siblings. I don't think that's something he's thought about yet. And I don't think he has the mental or the emotional capacity to even understand how they feel, even if they sit in front of him and tell him how they feel and what it has done to them. I don't think he can connect the dots with that. And if you don't understand what I'm saying right now, let me give you a little test. A young adult lady at her mother's funeral. You hear me? A young adult lady at her mother's funeral met a guy at her mother's funeral now. And they had a conversation, and she thought he was the most handsome, smart, great guy. And at the end of the funeral, she went looking for him, but she couldn't find him. And she started asking different ones there, family members, hey, do you know who that guy was you saw me talking to? Hey, that guy, he looked like such and such. He was this tall and he was wearing a black suit and a blue tie. Remember that guy? Do you know him? And nobody knew who he was. And so she Just didn't understand. But anyway, 2 weeks later, she murdered her sister. Why? Do 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 She murdered her sister because she thought that the guy would show up to the funeral so she could meet him again. That is the mentality of a psychopath. It's all about getting what they want. And they have no concept of the devastation that they cause. Oh, well, I killed my sister. I bet you he'll show up. If he showed up at my mother's funeral, he knew my mother, he'll show up at my sister's funeral. To hell that the sister's children are now motherless. They don't think that far. They can't think beyond themselves. And that is Nick Reiner. I'm going to the chat. Who do I have here? Ricky, hello, hello. And Matthew, hi. And Bam J Photo, hello. And my mom's did the same with my brother. Yeah. How does this compare to Brian McKnight's treatment of his sons? I gotta ponder that. I was never a fan of Brian McKnight. He always just seemed to me. But I did watch the interview with his son and his mother. You know what? I really don't have an answer for that. He said that's the dilemma that high-achieving people have, that their children have to face. Hey, James. Man, Nick could have done anything he wanted to do. Nick could have got money from his father and said, you know what? Dad, can I have some money? Can I buy can you just buy me an apartment building? And that'll give me something to do. Just rent out apartments. I can create some income for myself, He could have done that. He could have went to college. He could have got his GED. And maybe in that rich money world, it's not a GED that they can get. But he could have did whatever he needed to do to get to college because he didn't even go to high school. He needed purpose. I know that Rod tried to define and give that purpose, carve out that purpose for Nick's life and doing that movie together. I wish Nick would have developed a passion for that because that was just a shoo-in for him. He's a Nepo baby. He could have just spent time. I wish he had a passion for writing. Just spent time writing scripts for his father's company, Castle Rock. He could have done that. Maybe, his mother was a photographer and a producer. I'm sure he could have said, Dad, give me a position in your Castle Rock company. You know? Anything. But Nick's only passion and desire in life was to do drugs. Lots of drugs. His passion was to do a myriad of drugs. I don't think there's a drug under the sun that Nick did not do. And I'm not talking about just, just sniff coke or just sniff heroin. No, like coke in the morning and heroin at night. Or heroin in the morning and coke at night. And when it was time to go to sleep, he'll smoke a joint. I'm talking about doing drugs like that. Oh, you got it, huh, Bam? I suppose you're talking about the analogy that I made so that you can connect the dots with somebody who truly can't think outside of themselves with the girl at her mother's funeral. Well, that's a psychopath. That's how they think. That was Nick. When Nick realized that the buck stopped there with his parents, then they had to die. Why should they continue to live, and not give me what I want and not let me do what I want? Who are they to kick me out of my guest house? I got a little grandniece. She turned 4 years old the other day. I'm rethinking a lot of shit since this Nick Reiner thing. Because, y'all, I have been spoiling that little girl like you wouldn't believe. All she got to do is ask, and she shall receive. I mean, I've been buying her expensive shit. You shouldn't spend this much money on a little 2 or 3-year-old at one time. Now, next week I'm going to see her. I will arrive there Christmas Eve. I have bought her a Pearl Road Show Junior drum set that comes with the cymbals and everything. I have bought her a ukulele. I have bought her a drum pad, a Crayola drum pad with the Crayola drumsticks. What else am I bringing her? This is all that I'm bringing her next week. She just turned 4. I know, but she's so adorable and so smart. I can't help myself. But after this, I'm not going to buy her nothing else. But the drum set alone was $450. Also, I'm bringing her a Halloween Lionel train set. That was $224 or some shit. And I'm talking about, this is just what I'm bringing her next week. I'm not even going to go into what I've been buying and sending this child. But I'm going to stop. But it's so much fun for me. But I'm going to stop because I don't want her to be too spoiled. I was even thinking like cutting down some trees in my yard. And, there are houses that you can build and it costs about $20,000, but it's for kids, a playhouse. It's beautiful. And you can have air conditioning in there, put a TV, have, electrical work done, and you can have the house a replica of the main house. It would cost me $10,000 to cut down those trees. And, you got to pour the foundation and all that. And it's a house for a little kid. I'm sure they can enjoy it in their teenage years, but you know, to walk in the house as an adult, you're gonna have to duck some. But I figured, you know, the ceiling will be about 7 feet high or something like that, and it'll be one big room when you come in the front door. And you know, you can have sections, a little section for the kitchen and a little table and chair set. And then there's a ladder that you climb up to a loft area, and it's nothing that would be there but a mattress, you know. It's so adorable and so cute. And I wanted to do that for her fifth birthday. And I had to sit back and think, that's really too much for a little girl. That's too much. And I presented this to my friend, well, a former friend, and she said, "Madam with Bass, if you build that little girl a house in your backyard, I will never speak to you again." I was like, "Why?" She said, "Because that is too much. You are handicapping her. Because by the time she gets old enough to start dating and looking at marriage, ain't no guy going to be good enough for her, because she going to be like, I've had my own house since I was 5 years old. What have you done for me lately?" I was like, you know what? You're right. She already got her own little car. It's an Audi. You know, those little motorized cars she be driving with her sunglasses on and shit. Man, she's just so much fun. But I'm going to stop. After this Christmas, she'll get one gift from me, and it won't be an expensive one. But that little girl gets everything. But I'm going to stop. I promise you. Because I don't want to make her life difficult by giving her everything. I don't want to do that. That's bad. Especially, you know, when she gets into her teenage years, you keep giving her everything she wants. Comes a teenager, we done created a damn monster. But we have enough time to stop that we can prevent the monster in the teenage years. Because she's going to expect and demand whatever she wants, she should get. Because that's what we would have been doing all her life. And we can't do that. We can't. So I just thank God I got sense enough to put the brakes on it now. You know, that's how, you know, Nick got to the point, my guest house. I think that gets my gourd the most, besides what he did to his parents. The next thing is my guest house. Ooh, that's getting under my skin. You just don't know. You didn't even go to high school, and you talk about my guest house. Get the fuck out of here. Share another story with you about my cousins and two brothers, Stephen and Andrew. Andrew was, I think, 2 years older than Stephen, and they were like 13 and 11. And I remember Stephen telling me, you know, Andrew and my aunt used to always butt heads once he turned like 12 and 13 and all of that. And Stephen said, I can remember we'd be in the kitchen, and like my aunt would have said something like, no television tonight until you do your homework or whatever, or until you do your chores. And Stephen said, Andrew would be like, who is she to tell us that we can't watch our television, you know, and I should be able to have a television in my room. It's my room. And Stephen said he'd be sitting there looking at Andrew like, this is not our house. That is not your room. It's your room because you sleep in it, but you don't own it and you don't own this house. That's her room in her house. I'm not expressing it the way Stephen did, but you'd have to know Stephen. It was pretty funny. You know, the 11-year-old is telling the 13-year-old, why do you keep saying, yeah, because he was saying, and this is my house. And the 11-year-old was telling the 13-year-old, this isn't your house. You didn't buy this house. It's always the youngest kids that got more sense than the older kids. Anyway, I think I ranted enough. I will be watching this situation closely. And one more thing about this lawyer, I'd like to know. So Nick Reiner has a high-powered defense attorney, Mr. Alan Jackson. Excellent attorney. He costs money. Now, California has a law that if you murder your parents in California, you don't get your inheritance. They view it as if you predeceased your parents that you murdered. And so, how is he able to afford this attorney? Is this attorney doing this pro bono? I don't think he needs to do it pro bono for publicity, because he just saved the neck of this woman, Karen somebody, got her off. Excellent attorney. But how is Nick paying for this attorney? Could it be from his grandfather? You know, because they're Hollywood aristocrats, Hollywood royalty. Rob Reiner, his father, Carl Reiner. And Mr. Carl Reiner passed away at the age of 98 about 5 years ago, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, he could have left trust funds for each of his grandchildren, because that's what those rich people do. Uber rich. So could he be paying his attorney out of his trust fund from his grandfather? That's a possibility. Or I wouldn't be surprised if his siblings hired the attorney for Nick. Why would they do that, madam, with their asses? My brother murdered my parents. I wouldn't give him no damn attorney. I think that's what's happening. I think the brother, the older brother and the sister, got him this attorney. And you want to know why I think that? Because of who Rob and Michelle Reiner were and how much they loved Nick. And I think they know in their hearts that Rob Reiner, even though Nick did what he did, would want them to get Nick an attorney. I really think they're operating. They sat down and said to themselves, what would mom and dad want us to do? And I think that's why they're doing it. And I tell you one more thing that I think. I think when it's all said and done, Nick will not end up where he should end up, in San Quentin prison for the rest of his life. That's where he should be. But because of who he is, a member of an aristocratic family in Hollywood, the lawyer will get Nick sentenced to some place where he will live in a country club for the rest of his life. It will be a place where you can go horseback riding and you can play tennis and probably go on outings once a month. Lots of activities available to him. The best of food to eat. Fine dining. A nice room. Nice residence. Probably have his own apartment there. With the best of the best. Luxurious. And that's how he will spend the rest of his days, for butchering his parents like slaughtered pigs. And it's a place that will probably cost upwards of $1 million a year for him to be in. For butchering and slaughtering his parents like pigs. That is the essence of white privilege. That is the essence of white privilege with buku amounts of money. And Nick was right when he said he can do whatever he wants to do and get away with it. Now put that in your pipe and smoke it. Peace.